Welcome to this presentation on cybersecurity and identity theft. My name is David Murphy. I'm the president here at the Marshfield Medical Center Credit Union. And the importance of discussing cybersecurity and identity theft has never been more prevalent than it is in today's society. And so we wanted to give this presentation just to highlight some of the high-level information about what cybersecurity is and how identity theft can be impactful to you as an individual. So a little bit about the credit union. The Marshfield Medical Center Credit Union is located here in Marshfield, Wisconsin. We just have the single branch. We are open to anyone who works in healthcare throughout the entire state of Wisconsin. Being that we're in Marshfield, our primary driver of members is the Marshfield Clinic Health System, but we are open to those who work in any field of healthcare as well. Currently, we serve about 3,800 members across the state, and we are always looking to add to those numbers as well. So our agenda is going to be pretty basic today. We're going to cover cybersecurity and identity theft, as I discussed earlier. And for both topics, we're going to talk about what they are, what are some common examples that you may see, and how can you protect yourself from both. So cybersecurity, cybercrime. Cybersecurity is really the act of protecting your data, ultimately. And so cybersecurity and identity theft go hand in hand. They both cover a similar topic, if you will. They just approach it from different angles. So the cybersecurity side of things is how do you protect your data from getting it into the wrong hands? So if we go to our next slide here, some official definitions, if you will. So this is from the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or the CISA. Cybersecurity is the art of protecting networks, devices, and data from unauthorized access or criminal use, and the practice of ensuring confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information. Where cybercrime is the criminal activity that either targets or uses a computer network, or a network device. And that definition is provided by Kaspersky, which is a huge entity who monitors antivirus and other fraud attempts like that. So some terms that you may associate with cybersecurity. So we have social engineering. Social engineering is your common one that an individual will see, but it also impacts those who work in business or work in the government. So common terms with social engineering includes phishing, which is fraud attempts that are made by email. We have smishing, which are fraud attempts that are made by text message. And then we also have vishing, which are fraud attempts that are made by voice or phone calls. And we're going to go a little bit more in depth on those three specifically a little bit later here in the presentation. Ransomware is one that has popped up here in recent years, and that's one that typically is geared more towards government and businesses, so large organizations. And essentially what ransomware is, it's a virus or an attack that is perpetrated onto an entity's network that basically locks up certain pieces of data that are stored on a server or wherever you would keep that data. And essentially, it creates a key that is used to decrypt that encrypted information, but that key is held in the hands of the fraudster. And so what happens is once this malware gets attached onto a server and it encrypts all this data, the fraudsters will then reach out to the entity and essentially say, hey, if you want any of your data back, we will sell you the key for a certain dollar amount, hence the term ransomware. And we're not talking a couple dollars here, a couple dollars there. As we'll talk about in the next slide here, some of the examples that we've seen have reached the hundreds of millions of dollars when it comes to what these ransomware attacks actually cost. Malware and viruses tend to be not only on the entity level, but then also on the individual level. So this would be any type of malicious software or code that gets inputted onto your device, whether it is your computer or your laptop. We are even seeing this now starting to happen on tablets and even cell phones. And basically this malicious software can be used for a plethora of different reasons. For example, there's software out there that's called keylogger software. And essentially what will happen is in the background, the software will get installed on your device, and then it will track every single type of the keyboard that you make. And you may say, well, what is the point of that if I'm sending off an email or whatnot? Well, think of what you use your computer to log into, whether it's maybe your online banking, your credit card statements, some financial piece. if the fraudsters can track every single keystroke that you make, and they're able to get that information, they're able to then take that information, use it on their own devices, and gain unauthorized access into your banking accounts and whatnot. Denial of service attacks typically are geared more for your larger entities as well. So let's use Amazon as an example. Denial of service would be if a group of fraudsters doesn't want Amazon to be able to perpetrate business for a period of time, they may send, they'll write up code, and I'm not a fraudster, so I don't exactly know how this works, but essentially they'll write up code so that it will send millions and millions of attempts to visit a specific website. So in this case, it would be Amazon, to the point where your common everyday individual who's visiting the website to try to do business with them, they're not able to actually get onto that website as well. So it essentially locks out their website from carrying on your e-commerce and whatnot. And so with the business, from the business standpoint, that obviously means loss of revenue, loss of opportunities to sell more goods and services, and so it really has an impact on their daily operations. And then hacking is your general term for cybersecurity. Really, that would just be, you think of the guy sitting in their basement in Russia who's typing up code, trying to hack into like the US government's, let's say the IRS's website or the IRS's server. That's typically not geared for individuals unless you're developing code, I suppose, for maybe the next Facebook or whatnot, but typically that's something that you're going to see on the larger scale. So who should be concerned with cybersecurity? This is something that actually is impactful to all of us. So here we've identified that the government isn't immune from cybersecurity or protection from cyber attacks. We have businesses or entities that need to be diligent, as well as individuals. So some examples from all three classes. So on the government side, we have, back in 2017, the United Kingdom's National Health Service was hit by a ransomware attack. And within this attack, what ended up happening was the malicious software, which was called WannaCry, was delivered to the health system through unsupported systems. So if you follow computer and operating system upgrades over the years, you may recall Windows XP, which was around in the early 2000s to the late 2000s. Then we went to Windows 7 and 8 and 10 now, and now we're up to 11. But at this time in 2017, when this attack happened, this health system in the UK was still operating, a lot of their network was operating with Windows XP, which is no longer supported by Microsoft. And so what ended up happening was when an operating system is no longer supported by the issuer of that operating system, that means no updates are being made to the code to protect from new and future fraud and malware and virus attacks. So what ended up happening was someone exploited the fact that they were running XP, sent over a malicious email, which essentially created this, or which contained this WannaCry virus software within the message of the email. That ultimately got installed onto the devices and then ultimately onto the server that contained millions of pieces of data from patient care to scheduling. And with it being a ransomware attack, it essentially locked all that information out to the point where the National Health Service couldn't perpetrate any of their normal business operations as a result. And so while they tried to operate without having that information, think if you walked into your local healthcare facility and they weren't able to pull up any of your information as far as your patient records was concerned. They couldn't tell you when your next appointments were. They couldn't tell you what prescriptions you're supposed to be taking. Obviously, that's impactful to not only the facility, but then also to the individuals, the patients who are going up there. And so a hospital or a healthcare system cannot operate very long without any of that information. And so what ended up happening was that in order to regain access into their data, they ended up shelling out over the course of not only paying the ransomware, but then also in installing new software. They ended up paying out over 92 million pounds, which equates to over $110 million in the ransomware ransom, but then also in the protection upgrades to be able to avoid having a similar situation in the future. So again, a very expensive mistake from someone just clicking the wrong email and opening the wrong attachment in that email. Locally here, we have the city of Baltimore, which was one of the largest attacks here in the United States that I was able to find. So this happened in 2019, And it was similar in that hackers breached the city servers, which were used to house not only information about all the property tax payments or whatnot, but then it also shut down their property tax portal. And what that meant was that for that period of time, they weren't able to collect any payments that were due to the city. And so think of a city budget where they need that money to be able to come in to carry out administrative needs or whatnot. Well, they're not able to collect any of those dollars from their citizens. And so that obviously has an impact on their ability to carry out what they need to as a city is concerned. That ransomware that was used in that attack was called Robinhood. And the city tried to actually mitigate this through their own means. They may have tried to take old data that was like backups from their existing servers and try to re-upload those. They actually waited a total of 3 months before they actually gave into this ransomware. So 3 months is a long time for any entity to not be able to have their data to be operating with. And ultimately, it cost the city of Baltimore over $18 million to get back that data and to be able to get back up and running. And to think that this is not just a national or an international phenomenon, to bring it even more local, we have the Marshfield School District here in Wisconsin. So this also happened in 2019. This was a little bit different. This wasn't ransomware, but what ended up happening was an unsolicited email was sent to one of the city or the school district employees requesting updated banking information to the school district's bank account. Made it look like it was a legitimate request. The recipient unknowingly gave the information to the fraudsters, who then ultimately requested and successfully, I should say, requested wire transfers from the school district's bank account to another bank account, which ended up being somewhere in Florida. And so the total amount that was requested was $660,000. Thankfully, $500,000 of that they were able to stop the transfer of, as they identified that it was actually a fraudulent attack, but the other $160,000 ultimately was lost to those fraudsters. From the business standpoint, now a lot of times what we see on the business end is more data breaches than we do some of these financial hacks, as we saw with the government, but we do see both types with those as well. So the three that we've identified here are Yahoo, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So with these entities, if you are enrolled with any of these, or maybe it's not Yahoo, but maybe it's Gmail with a Google account, or if you're still with the old MSN information, think of the information that you have to provide when you sign up for an email address through them or any of the services that you're providing. So again, a lot of times you have to select a username and a password, but you're also providing them with names, of course. Sometimes birth dates, sometimes social security numbers, probably not on these types of websites, but some websites will ask for this information. Well, all this data is stored in servers that the entities use to be able to keep track of their users. But when those servers are then ultimately hacked and the data is taken, that data is then used to create a persona for each individual to essentially be able to mimic these people outside of these entities. So like, for example, if a fraudster gets the information from your LinkedIn account, maybe they're able to reach out to a banking facility and try to gain information about your banking account based on the information that they took from your LinkedIn account. So with Yahoo, they actually went through 2 different hacks, and ultimately they had private email messages and private information for as many as 1.5 billion people that were compromised in between the two true incidences with them. LinkedIn, that one is a more recent one. That actually happened in 2021. They identified that approximately 700 million users' personal data, which is about 93% of all members who use LinkedIn, was stolen in some form. And then Facebook was 2019, and there was actually a software exploitation within the Add Friend feature that Facebook uses, and that exploitation allowed fraudsters to gain information on nearly 530 million users. On the individual standpoint, we know that this happens every day, so as it states here, there's too many to list that we could be here all day talking about those. So again, why are these data breaches significant? Well, think about, now this is a little old school because we're starting to see a transition to the use of multi-factor authentication when it comes to sending text messages, or sometimes, like for example, here at the credit union, we utilize a security code that gets either gets sent to you in a text message, a phone call, or it can get emailed to you. But back in the day, they used to use these security questions. And you may be saying, okay, well, again, why is the information, if I have a LinkedIn account, why does that matter if that data is breached when I hardly use my LinkedIn account and I primarily use Facebook, for example? Well, a lot of times the questions that are identified on these profiles, they happen to be the same questions that are used by various entities. And so if you provide, for example, what's your first pet's name on this website and that data is taken, and that question pops up on a different website, odds are you're using the same answer for that. So they have that information then to be able to perpetrate fraud into or unauthorized access into this other portal as well. But how are they getting this information? So it's not just through data breaches in which they're going to gather this. Perhaps you've seen these different posts on social media, primarily on Facebook, but sometimes on Instagram or wherever, right? This one says, when was your first job? We also have, do you remember your first grade teacher's name? And then the last one on the right says, what's your favorite movie of all time? Now they're shown as a way to facilitate social engagement, right? It's just something to have a little fun with, to just reminisce perhaps. But a lot of times these are the same questions that are being used to set up online profiles. And so if you're providing this, if you're answering these questions, you're free willingly providing this information to potential fraudsters. And you may think, well, that's pretty manipulative, or that seems pretty sinister to be doing that. Well, unfortunately, fraudsters have no bounds when it comes to how they're going to gather this information. So while they may need to go through data breaches and purchase this information that's found on the dark web about you, if they can come out to Facebook and get this information from you, it's a lot easier on their end, and it's a lot more successful most likely, because odds are you're probably going to give the right answer to these questions if you're answering them. So really, when you come across any of these types of posts, it's really important to understand, okay, well, if I share this information, can this information be used against me in the future to be able to, again, gain unauthorized access to an account, or to provide an answer to a security question to a local financial institution, or whatever the case is. It's something that you don't necessarily equate or link together, but it is something that does happen. So example of some cyber crimes that we have here. So as I mentioned earlier, we have the phishing, smishing, and vishing attempts. And basically what this is it's a message or a phone call in the case of the vishing, but it's a message that is sent to the recipient in an attempt to gain access to information that maybe isn't readily available through, whether it's through some of these data breaches or however that they would get the information otherwise. So like in the case of phishing, it may be an email that's sent through, and they're typically not going to be geared in a way that says, hey, tell me the last 4 numbers of your social security number. They're probably not going to be that bold, but what may end up happening is there may be a link in that email that mimics, so let's say it's an email, and I'm going to show you an example here in a moment, but maybe it's an email that looks like it's coming from Microsoft, and you have a Microsoft account through work, or you have a personal Microsoft account, and it takes you to a fraudulent website that says, hey, I just need you to verify this information, your birth date, your social security number, your address, so on and so forth. That information then gets submitted to the fraudsters, and they have that information for you. Same thing with smishing. Again, that's just sent through text message. We actually had a recent incident here at the credit union where messages were sent out from fraudsters who were pretending to be a part of the credit union, who said, hey, we see that you did this fraudulent transaction, or we have this attempt on your account. Is this actually a valid attempt? If you responded back and said, no, that's not a valid attempt, the fraudsters then reached out via phone. And typically in those situations, A, that's not going to happen that way necessarily, but B, then they shouldn't be calling and then asking you to verify a bunch of information on your account, but that's what ended up happening in this particular attempt. We also have gift card requests. So this is a big one from the financial institution standpoint, and we see this happen a lot actually even around this area, and it kind of dovetails into some of the other scams that are on here, which I'll go through in a second. But with the gift card requests, a lot of times fraudsters aren't saying, hey, can you send me a check for $3,000? Can you send me the money this way? But a lot of times, especially when they're targeting the older population, they're not as familiar with P2P transfers, or they're not as even familiar with wire transfers, because that requires that they give out that information, right, to know where that information needs to be sent. So what they'll do is they'll get an older person typically on the phone, and they'll say, hey, Whether it's the lottery scam, hey, you won all this money, but I need you to send some money so that I can actually issue the check to you, or however they're trying to spin it to make it sound legit. So what I need you to do is I need you to go into your financial institution. I need you to get cash and then go to the store, whether it's Walgreens, Target, Walmart, doesn't matter where, and I need you to buy this gift card. A lot of times it's Apple gift cards, but it doesn't have to be. It can be just your generic gift card. And so what will happen is if the individual carries through with the request, they'll come in here, they'll get the large amount of cash, they'll go to the store, they'll buy the gift card, and then the fraudster will say, well, give me that information so that I can facilitate the payment. And then at that point in time, then we'll go ahead and we'll carry through with whatever the next step is that they promise. Well, as soon as that information from that gift card is provided to the fraudster, that payment is, or that transaction is attempted on the card, and as soon as it goes through successfully, the call ends. And what ends up happening is the fraudsters now have that money. The person who was on the other end of the call is out that money, and ultimately, who loses in that situation? It's the individual who received the call in the first place. They'll do it with gift cards because you legitimately went in and purchased a gift card, so you can't dispute the transaction with the person that you bought the gift card from. And you willingly gave that information out, so it's a lot harder to go back and say, well, I didn't do this. Now, you may say, I didn't mean to do this, which is legitimate, but that's not necessarily a good enough reason for the gift card company or whoever to refund your money. So a lot of times that's an easy way to essentially get that cash over without submitting cash. The hurt family members is a big one that we're seeing nowadays as well. And so how this plays out is, again, a lot of these are geared towards older individuals. And so you may get a phone call or you may get a text message from someone who claims that something bad happened to a family member. Typically it's, if it's geared for a grandmother or a grandfather, typically it's, oh, something happened to your grandson or granddaughter. A lot of times what it does is it plays on the it plays on your emotions. It's emotionally manipulative on the individual. And so it says, hey, your grandson got picked up for drunk driving. He doesn't want his parents to know, but he does need some money that's sent to be able to get him out of jail, or something bad may end up happening. And what will happen is if the grandparent gets into the emotional state where, well, I don't want anything bad to happen to my grandson or grandchild or whatever the family member is, they'll say whatever it takes to get, make sure that they're protected or whatnot. And so that's where the gift card requests come in, because that's usually the easiest way to get money from point A to point B quickly without actually transmitting any of the information back to the recipient of the phone call. But essentially, once that information gets shared on, if the victim ultimately does send all that information off or goes through with the transaction, again, they're out that money ultimately. And they're in 99 out of 100 cases, there never was an issue with the family member or whoever was involved. So anytime you get hit with those types of calls, as hard as it may be because your emotions kick in and you want to do everything you can to protect that family member, your first step might be to take a step back and say, well, let me get a hold of that individual. Because that right there is usually a tall tale sign, because the fraudster will say, well, no, you can't get a hold of them, or there's a reason that you can't actually follow up to verify whether something actually happened, because they don't want you to find out that this is in fact a scam. So they'll give you reasons why you can't contact the parents or the grandchildren or whoever is involved with this, because they don't want you to ultimately find out that it's not true. The dating scams is another big one that we're seeing. And so what this ends up happening is, and this one, while we have seen this hit a lot of older individuals, this is something that also hits anyone of all ages. And so what happens in this situation is, especially with the rise in dating apps and online dating, is someone will meet someone online and things will go great. You think that you found the person of your dreams. And shortly after you meet this individual, there starts to be some requests for funds. And usually there's a story behind it. It's not just, hey, just send me some money for the heck of it, but it's going to be, hey, I have this health situation and I can't afford to pay for it. So I really need $15,000 sent over to me. I need some money, whatever it is. Sometimes we'll see it that if the individual claims that they're out of the country, so they'll say, I'd really love to come visit you, but I can't afford to fly from wherever, the Philippines to the United States. So if you can send me $20,000, I'll go ahead and book the flight, and I'll make sure that I can get there so that we can be together. So they give you a legitimate reason why they're requesting the money, and then so the individual who's on the receiving end of these messages will ultimately then go through and send the money to the person, the fraudster, ultimately, with the idea that there was no desire to actually carry out the action that is being requested in the request for cash. Ultimately, it's just an attempt to be able to pull money from those individuals. What we're seeing with that is one of the largest scams that are being hit, especially towards older individuals in today's society. And unfortunately, it's not going away, because a lot of these scams, the common thread is that you're seeing an emotional manipulation out of this. And so you want, as hard as it is, you really want to pull yourself out of that, take a step back, so to speak, and just really think through, okay, does this make sense? Would it make sense that I need to be sending money to this individual? I just met this person, whatever the case is. Because that thought process right there is a big protection towards making sure that you don't fall victim to this. The fake tech support is another one that happens on probably a smaller scale, I would say, ultimately. What ends up happening is an individual will receive a call from someone who claims to be from some big tech support company. So maybe it's Microsoft, or maybe it's Apple, or whoever. And they'll say, hey, we just caught wind that your device, laptop, computer, your tablet, whatever the device is, needs to be upgraded because we see that there's some updates that are missing here. Can we jump onto your device? And we're going to go ahead and do whatever upgrades are needed for that. So it does require that the recipient of those calls does give them access onto the device. But as soon as they do that, there's a couple different ways that the fraudster may carry out some fraud. One is they may go back to what we talked about with malware and viruses. They may install some type of a malicious software onto your computer to be able to either track the activity or to figure out maybe it manipulates your device in some fashion. The other one that we see here primarily is when the fraudsters gain access through this tech support help is they'll actually log into your online banking and they'll move money around, making it look like, hey, we just deposited money into your account. We need you to then go ahead and take that money and send it back to us as payment, let's just say. And so we have a lot of times people who will call and say, yeah, I'm supposed to take this $400 that was just deposited and I need to send it to ABC. And we look at it and we say, well, no, this is actually just a transfer internally in your account. They didn't actually deposit money. And there we know, because they'll say, well, I never initiated a transfer. We know that that fraudster was the one who attempted that to be able to collect money out of that individual. So really, these companies should not be calling you to request unauthorized access into your devices ultimately. If you do receive one of these calls, just hang up the phone. There's no reason that they should be doing that. Really, you should be the one that's reaching out to someone if you actually do need help. Work with someone locally. We have a few entities here in Marshfield or wherever you're located. You're going to be able to find someone who has some type of tech support who's going to be able to help you ultimately. So again, how can you protect yourself from all these attempts that are out there? First step would be don't open unsolicited messages, whether it is phone, email, or receiving phone calls. It doesn't matter. If you don't know who the sender is, take a step back and either delete it right away or give it a second. Make sure that it's legitimate what they're actually asking. If you're really unsure, a lot of times what we'll do is if it's a phone call, we'll Google the phone number and see if we can come up with some information as to who is calling. Otherwise, just delete it and move on. If it's something really important, they will call back and they will get a hold of you. Second suggestion would be to have a trusted individual that can assist you with your finances. So a lot of times this can be children if you are older, but what we're seeing a lot more of, and not saying every child is like this, but we are seeing a lot more in the scope of elder abuse and exploitation when it comes to children who are taking advantage of elderly parents who they're being coached to make certain decisions that aren't maybe the best decision ultimately for the individual, but more for the child or whoever is giving the advice. So make sure that you identify individuals who you do trust that will give you sound advice, but then don't be afraid to rely on those individuals ultimately. Likewise, find some trusted community partners that you can reach out to, whether it's your local bank or credit union or the local police department. Some areas have some resources available to specifically for senior citizens. Make sure at the end of the day that if you feel like you've either received one of these messages, you're not sure about one of these messages, or you have gone ahead and given out this information to someone and you're not sure that it was legitimate, what you did, instead of just sitting on that information or feeling sorry or feeling ashamed of yourself for doing that, take action to make sure that you actually follow up on that, to take the steps to protect yourself, because that action that you took in the past is over and done with. There's nothing you can do about that and going back and reversing that, but you can take steps going forward to protect yourself. And then the last step is just limit the information that you share online, whether primarily it's through social media, but again, we showed some of those fun posts that are out there. That information is low-hanging fruit for fraudsters ultimately. Specifically to phishing emails, so these have been circulating for a number of years now, and they're not going away. They're actually getting more sophisticated, unfortunately, but they are still going around and they are pretty prevalent. So what are some things to watch for when it comes to phishing emails? Well, a lot of times you're going to see misspelled words or poor grammar. So you're going to read a sentence and it doesn't make sense grammatically. That's a clue that is a fraudulent phishing attempt. The email, through the tone, creates a sense of urgency. So it may say, hey, you need to take action today to do whatever they're requesting. The domain, which is the sender of the email, may be different from the organization that they're trying to mimic. So for example, as I said in the earlier example, if you're working with Microsoft and all of a sudden you see an email come through and it's from xyz.usa.com, that may be an alert to say, well, why those two things should line up. And again, we'll see some examples here in a second. Some of the emails will come right out and ask for personal information through the message. That's typically not something that any organization is going to do through email. And then if there's an attachment to the email that you don't think should be there, or if it just looks suspicious in general, a lot of times, again, if you're not expecting an attached email, don't open the attachment that's included there. So an example here from, this is one that mimics Office 365. And so this is the example I just gave here earlier. So while it says Office 365 is the sender, you can see that the sender of this email is a completely different email address. And the domain, when we say email domain, it's the last part after the and sign. So normally it would say something like Microsoft.com or whoever, whatever domain that Microsoft ultimately uses to send these out, but that's a completely different domain. So that's a clue that this is not legit. Number 2 and 3, it says use of threatening language. So again, that sense of urgency. Your mailbox will shut down, verify your account, and then we'll be forced to block your account. So it's creating that sense of, well, if I don't do something, something bad is going to happen. So that sense of urgency. We also have a suspicious link here in this email. And then finally, and this is a harder one to catch, but there's odd capitalization and punctuation. So as you can see in the Office 365 logo, there's a capital O, but down here in the footer, we have a lowercase o, which doesn't mirror what the company should be using. Another example here is from a university. So again, the email address, you would expect that if it's from Mercer University that they would have some type of an edu address that this email is coming from, which they do not. There are some spelling mistakes here highlighted up here. Again, there's that threat or sense of urgency that's included here. And then it doesn't identify this, but perhaps this email or this website here actually doesn't go to the website that's actually listed there. Just because it says one thing, they can type whatever they want in there, so it could direct you to a completely different website as well. So again, there are things to do if you are victimized, but here's some things that you should not do. You should never feel embarrassed or ashamed if you were victimized by one of these fraud attempts. The fraudsters are very good at what they do. This is something that they've been doing for a number of years. They've gotten very sophisticated with their process. And ultimately, there's a reason that they keep doing it. It's because they're successful with it. So if you do fall victim to one of these, don't feel shame. Don't feel embarrassed that you were one of the victims. It happens to everyone. It happens to the best of us, maybe is how I should word that. So the worst thing you can do is not do anything about it at all. Don't wait to talk to authorities and trusted partners. So as we talked about a little bit earlier, don't keep this information to yourself. A lot of times, if we are made aware of a situation like this, we can take steps to try to help you protect your information going forward. And so the longer you wait, though, the harder it is to protect that information, because if they're taking money out of your account on a daily basis and you wait a month before you say something, that could be a month's worth of finances that are gone ultimately. And then again, don't keep this information from trusted loved ones. Really, at the end of the day, keeping this information to yourself is probably, it's doubling down on the situation and making it almost worse than if you were to come out and just say, hey, this happened, what do I need to do to protect myself? If you are victimized by any of these, contact your local authorities. So whether it is the police department or some type of aging resource center, whatever it is, or talk to your local bank, your credit union, anywhere that you have accounts. They should be able to have people on hand who can help you, walk you through the steps that would be necessary to be able to try to protect yourself going forward. If you had a situation with a computer or a laptop or some type of electronic device, and you think that there was something either installed or unauthorized access provided to that device, take it into a trusted partner to get it checked. Because a lot of times you may not think that anything was installed on there because your computer's not alerting you, but that's how they built that software. That software is just running in the background. And so someone that is an expert on running and checking for that information, they may be able to find stuff on there and remove that before more information is ultimately taken from you. Simple steps would include changing your usernames and your passwords. So if you're like me, I have access to, through work and personally, I have access to probably 100 different websites. I probably do use the same username and sometimes use the same password, even though they suggest not to, just because it's so hard to keep track of them separately. But if they have the password for one of your websites and you use the same password for every website, well then guess what? They just got the password to every one of the websites you have access to. So make sure that you're changing that, updating that, so that they don't, at least, they may have access to one website, but they ultimately aren't able to get access to everything else that's in your name. And then finally, just check with your family members. Again, just reach out to individuals, make sure that you're talking to the people that can help you with this. Maybe they can check in on you more frequently just in case you have questions or whatnot. But again, keeping this information yourself really isn't beneficial. So now we're going to dive into identity theft. So while the cybersecurity part of it is really about protecting your information or what to do if that information is taken, the identity theft is essentially the act of what they use that information for. So according to the USA Gov, identity theft happens when someone uses your personal or financial information without your permission. And this can occur with or without your involvement. Again, there's a difference between like data breaches and social engineering, which we did touch on a little bit earlier. So how does identity theft relate to cybersecurity? Well, cybersecurity covers the protection of the information, as we said earlier, where identity theft really covers how that stolen information is used against you in the future. So these are some steps you can take to actually protect yourself from being a victim of identity theft. You can place credit freezes on the credit reports that you have. So there's 3 major credit bureaus that are available typically in the United States at least. We have TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian. And for free, a free service that you can undertake with all 3 of those is you can actually place a freeze in your credit report. And what that does is if someone gets a hold of your information and goes and tries to apply for a loan in your name or tries to do some activity where it triggers your credit report, instead of that entity who's pulling their credit getting full access to your credit report, it'll actually get a message back saying, hey, we need you to unfreeze that credit report, which is actually going to be a roadblock for the fraudster because they're not going to be able to actually call and get that credit report unfrozen. And depending on like if it's a loan, for example, most likely they're not going to be able to actually take a loan out in your name fraudulently if they can't actually get your credit pulled on you. So that's one step that will help protect you from having unauthorized access to your information. You can purchase identity theft protection that's available in the marketplace. So common companies include LifeLock. There's a company called Aura that does this as well. But a lot of them will charge a small fee per month. But what they'll do is they'll not only help you in the event that you do have your identity stolen, but they are searching what's called the dark web, which essentially is the underground place, if you will, where all this information is traded or sold between fraudsters. They will actually scan that dark web to find out, okay, yeah, your information was included in this breach or whatever, and they'll help you try to protect yourself as much as possible. There's only so much, at the end of the day, there's only so much that these companies can do, because if fraudsters have this information, if they have your social security number, you can't go and change your social security number. There's not much you can do with it. But with things like credit cards, debit cards, if they find that card number out there and it's an active card, they can at least suggest you, hey, maybe it's a good idea to get a new card issued because we're finding it's out there and there may be fraudulent attempts made against that card here in the future. There is cybersecurity insurance available. I don't know too much about this. I would direct you to a podcast that we held with a local insurance company here in Marshfield that highlights a little bit more about that. But if that's something that you're interested in, I would encourage you to reach out to your homeowner's insurance carrier to find out what options they have for cybersecurity insurance. Review your credit reports periodically. So there's a free website through the U.S. government called annualcreditreport.com that before COVID, they let you pull your credit once a year through the 3 credit bureaus. Since COVID has hit, and I haven't heard that they've made any plans to change this, but they've allowed for more frequent pulls of your credit report. And what that does is it just allows you to gain insight as to, okay, was there new credit cards taken out in your name that you didn't take out? Or in some situations, we've seen people be able to actually take out new car loans or new home loans even in people's names without them even being aware of it, just because of all the information that's being taken from them. The last 2 have to do more with your paper information. So if you receive paper statements in the mail, like a credit card company or your banking account information, instead of just throwing that in the regular garbage where someone could hypothetically go through and dig through your garbage and get that information, try to take that information and get it shred. For those of you who live in the country, if you burn your garbage, make sure that you're actually disposing of that information in a more secure way than just simply throwing it in the garbage, because some people can go through and try to take that information from you. And if there's information on there that they can use to ultimately carry out some type of fraud in the future, that's something that could be easily avoided. And then finally, just keep track of your mail. So if you're the type who receives a paper statement for your credit card every month, and you notice one month that you don't receive it, that might be a red flag to say, well, okay, did the mail just eat it up this month, or did someone actually go through and take stuff from my mailbox? There's not a whole lot that the post office is going to do for you ultimately if you don't receive a piece of mail, but it may be something worth alerting with the company who sent that statement or whatever piece of mail you're referring to is. Again, similar to the same steps if you're a victim of cybersecurity, but if you're victimized by identity theft, you can file a report with the U.S. government. So you can go to identitytheft.gov, or there is a phone number that you can call. You can file a report with a local authority if you choose. You can place fraud alerts. In addition to freezing your credit, you can actually place a fraud alert on your credit report just stating that, yes, this individual was a victim of fraud in the past, and so it just gives the creditor or whoever pulls your credit a heads up that, hey, I need to take a little bit more time and do a little bit more diligence to make sure that I am actually working with the person that claims that this person is. Contact your banks and your credit unions, even if the fraud wasn't perpetrated through them, because they may want to place some type of alert on your accounts just to make sure that they know who they're working with. Similarly, if you know who the fraud was perpetrated through, contact those companies as well just to let them know that this happened. And in some instances, we've had where too much information about an account was given out, and so we actually request that you close out that account and start a brand new account so they don't have that information on you. So again, we touched base on this a little bit, but how impactful is identity theft? Well, anyone who has pretending to be you, they can apply for fraudulent loans or credit cards in your name. We see that a lot with credit cards primarily, where someone will take a credit card, they'll rack up a huge bill, they won't make the payments obviously, and then the creditors are coming back after the individual whose identity was stolen saying, hey, where's the payment on this? It wrecks your credit ultimately, which can have impact on not only how much money you're paying in interest in the future, but then also on your ability to actually take out future loans when you actually are the one who wants to do that. They could try to change pertinent information, so they may contact a local bank or credit union and say, hey, I need to change my phone number, or I need to change my address, so that not only do they have unauthorized access, but now the information is not going to the rightful owner because they're going to this fraudulent person. And if the individual who was victimized isn't aware of that or doesn't keep track of their statements or whatnot, they may be well unaware that this has happened. Again, impersonation, so someone may try to call, trying to garner unrightful access to information on your account, mimicking you. In addition to the fraudulent loan applications, we have seen attempts for like fraudulent passports or unemployment or Social Security benefits being applied for. Tax returns is another area that can be submitted on your behalf fraudulently. And then finally, it can be used to steal money from you. So that's all I had for this presentation. I hope that you found it useful to discuss the differences between cybersecurity and identity theft and to understand the importance of protecting your identity overall. If you have any questions about any of these topics that we discussed today, I encourage you to reach out to the credit union here. You can visit our website, MMCCU.com, or you can always give us a call, and we're more than happy to sit down with you or take the time to discuss any situation that you may face to try to better help you work your way through that. Thank you.